I stayed quiet while they erased me from my own husband's will. And that was their first mistake. They didn't even say my name when the lawyer started reading, not once, not Margaret Collins, not wife, not anything, just a room full of voices talking like I wasn't sitting right there at the head of the table where I'd spent 40 years hosting holidays, birthdays, every moment that built that family, and I just watched. Daniel sat across from me, my son, 39 years old, wearing his father's watch like he'd already stepped into the role, flipping through documents like he owned them, like he owned everything. And maybe he thought he did because the way he talked, the way he leaned back in that chair, it wasn't grief, it was confidence. The house goes to me, he said, casual, like he was reading off a grocery list. The investment accounts will be split, and the business assets are already being transferred. Already being transferred, I caught that, but I didn't say anything. I just folded my hands in my lap and let him keep talking. Big mistake. Robert Hayes, the lawyer, sat at the end of the table, 56, precise, careful, the kind of man who measured every word. But even he looked off, like something didn't sit right, like a detail wasn't lining up. But Daniel didn't notice, he just kept going faster now, like he wanted to get it done before anyone could question him. Mom's taken care of, he added, not even looking at me when he said it, like I was a box already checked off, handled, finished. And someone at the table actually nodded, like that made sense, like 40 years of marriage could be summarized in one sentence and pushed aside. I felt it then, not anger, not yet, something colder, sharper, the kind of realization that settles in your chest and doesn't leave, because I knew my husband, I knew the man I built a life with, and this didn't sound like him, not even close. But I didn't interrupt, I didn't defend myself, I didn't ask questions, I just listened. Daniel slid a stack of papers across the table toward me. Neat, prepared, waiting. We just need your signature here, he said, finally looking at me like this was the part where I played along, like this was routine, like I was supposed to nod, smile, and make it easy for them. I picked up the pen, felt the weight of it in my hand, and for a second the room went quiet, everyone watching, waiting for me to sign away whatever they thought I still had. I glanced down at the document, pages of legal language, dense, cold, final, and I could hear Daniel's voice again, softer now, almost reassuring. It's just a formality. Just a formality. I almost smiled. I didn't say anything. I let them think I didn't understand, let them believe I was exactly who they thought I was, a quiet old woman who would go along with whatever they decided. They had no idea what they missed. And neither did I. Not yet. I held the pen just above the paper and did not move, not yet, because something about the way Daniel rushed this felt wrong, too clean, too prepared, like a conversation that had already happened without me. And I could feel every pair of eyes on my hand waiting for that signature, waiting for me to make it easy. Go ahead, Mom, Daniel said, a little sharper now, like patience was starting to wear thin, and that told me everything I needed to know, because grief does not sound like that. Grief does not rush, grief does not organize paperwork before the flowers are even gone. I lowered the pen slowly and looked up at him for the first time since he started talking, really looked at him, and he barely held my gaze before glancing at Robert Hayes like he needed backup, like this was not as simple as he thought it would be. Robert shifted in his chair just slightly, but I caught it, that hesitation, that flicker of something he was not saying, and it sat there in the room between us, quiet but heavy. I just want to understand something, I said, calm, steady, the kind of voice I used for years when things needed to be handled without drama. And Daniel let out a breath like I was slowing everything down on purpose. There is nothing to understand, he replied quickly, too quickly, tapping the paper with his finger. It is all standard, everything has already been reviewed. Already been reviewed. Not by me. I nodded like I accepted that, like I believed him, and I looked back. Down at the document, scanning lines that were meant to blur together, but they did not anymore, not now that I was paying attention. Numbers, transfers, property descriptions, legal language that was supposed to sound final. And then something else buried deeper, phrased differently, not as polished, almost like it had been added without much thought. And that was when I felt it again, that cold certainty settling in. Did you read everything? I asked quietly, still looking at the page. And the room went still in a different way this time. Not impatient, not expectant, but uncertain. Daniel let out a short laugh, forced, like the question itself was ridiculous. Of course I did, he said, but he did not sound convincing, not to me, not anymore. I lifted my eyes slowly to Robert, not Daniel, and I saw it clearly now, the tension in his face, the way his fingers pressed together on the table, the way he avoided speaking until he absolutely had to. Mr. Hayes, I said, still calm. Did he read everything? That was the moment everything shifted, small at first, almost invisible, but enough because Robert inhaled like he was about to say something he could not take back. and Daniel turned toward him, sharp warning almost, but it was too late for that. I set the pen down on the table, not signing, not yet, and leaned back in my chair for the first time since this started, finally taking up space in a room that had tried to erase me. Maybe we should slow down, Robert said carefully, choosing each word like it mattered, because now it did, and Daniel's expression changed, just for a second, the confidence cracking at the edges, replaced by something else, something closer to concern. I did not say another word. I did not need to. They were starting to realize something was off, something they had missed, and I could feel it building, quiet but undeniable. Like a door they thought was closed had just been left slightly open, and none of them knew what was on the other side. Daniel leaned forward, his voice tighter now, less controlled, like the room had slipped just enough out of his grip to make him uncomfortable. There is no reason to slow down, he said, looking directly at Robert, not me, as if I was no longer the person he needed to convince. Everything in that document is standard procedure. Robert did not respond right away, and that silence stretched longer than it should have, long enough for everyone at the table to feel it. I watched Daniel's jaw tense, watched his fingers tap once against the paper, then stop when he realized it gave away too much. He was not as calm as he wanted to seem. I turned one page, then another, slow, deliberate, not because I needed more time to read, but because I wanted them to sit in it, that growing uncertainty, that quiet shift in control. This section, I said lightly, almost like I was asking out of curiosity, not challenge, what is this referring to? I tapped a paragraph near the bottom, a clause that did not match the tone of the rest, not clean, not simplified, just there waiting. Daniel glanced at it, quick, dismissive, and waved his hand. That is nothing important, just legal language, he said, but he did not explain it, and that was the problem. Robert finally spoke, his voice measured but different now, heavier. It is not exactly nothing, he said, and Daniel turned sharply toward him. What does that mean? Daniel asked, and there was something under the question now, not just annoyance, something closer to concern. Robert adjusted his glasses, buying himself a second, but there was no clean way out of it anymore. It means that clause outlines a condition tied to the transfer of all primary assets, he said carefully, each word landing slower than the last. I did not interrupt. I let him continue. Big mistake for them. And what condition is that? I asked, still calm, still steady, like this was a normal conversation and not the moment everything was starting to crack open. Robert looked at me, then at Daniel, then back at the document, like he wished he had caught it earlier, like he was realizing he had been walking through this just as blindly as everyone else. The transfer requires full spousal acknowledgement and signature prior to execution, he said finally, and the words settled into the room like something solid. Daniel blinked once, then shook his head. That is already what we are doing, he said quickly, trying to pull control back, trying to force the situation into something simple again. Robert did not nod. He did not agree. No, he said, quieter now but firmer. That is not exactly what it says. I could feel the shift fully now, not small anymore, not subtle, something real, something irreversible starting to take shape, and I leaned back slightly, folding my hands again, letting them hear it without me pushing. Then what does it say? I asked. Robert exhaled slowly, like he understood the weight of the next sentence before he even spoke it. It states that any division, allocation, or prearranged distribution of assets conducted without the documented consent of the spouse prior to review will be considered invalid, he said, and this time, no one moved. Daniel stared at him, the confidence gone now, replaced by something sharper, something uncertain. That does not apply, he said, but his voice had lost its edge. We have not finalized anything yet. Robert did not look convinced. You just stated that transfers are already in progress, he replied, and Daniel did not answer right away. I did not need to say anything. I just watched, quiet, steady, exactly where they thought I would be powerless, and for the first time since this started, Daniel looked at me not like I was irrelevant but like I was a problem he did not know how to fix. Daniel pushed his chair back slightly, not enough to stand but enough to create distance, like he needed space to think, or maybe to regain control that was already slipping. You are overcomplicating this, he said, but he was not looking at me anymore. He was locked on Robert, waiting for him to correct himself, to walk it back, to make it simple again. Robert did not. He kept his eyes on the document, scanning the clause again, slower this time, like he was verifying what he already knew was there. I am not overcomplicating it, he said calmly, and that calm made it worse because it left no room for denial. The language is very specific. I could feel the tension tighten around the table, like something invisible had just snapped into place and no one knew how to undo it. Daniel let out a short breath through his nose, frustration creeping in. Then explain it clearly, he said, sharper now, the patience gone. Because from where I am sitting, nothing has been finalized, nothing has been signed, so there is no issue. He leaned forward again, pressing his palm flat against the table like he could anchor the situation back in his favor. Robert finally looked up, meeting his eyes directly. The issue is not whether it is finalized, he said, and his voice did not rise, did not waver. The issue is whether actions have already been taken in reliance on an incomplete process. Daniel's expression shifted again just for a second, but I saw it, that flicker of realization quickly covered. What actions? He asked, but the question came too fast, too defensive. Robert did not answer right away, and that silence said more than anything else. I tilted my head slightly, watching Daniel now, not with anger, not even with disappointment, just with clarity, because the pieces were starting to fall into place in a way that felt almost inevitable. You mentioned transfers, I said softly, bringing it back to his own words, not adding anything, just repeating what he had already admitted. You said they were already in progress. Daniel's jaw tightened, and for the first time, he did not have an immediate response. He glanced down at the papers, then back at Robert like he was recalculating, like he was trying to figure out how much had been exposed and how much he could still control. Preliminary steps, he said finally, choosing his words carefully now, very carefully. Nothing official. Robert nodded once, slow but not in agreement. Preliminary steps taken before full review and consent can still trigger that clause, he said, and the room went quiet again, heavier this time, because now it was not just a possibility, it was a consequence. I picked up the pen again, turning it lightly between my fingers, not to sign but just to feel it, to remind them that the one thing they needed from me was the one thing they did not have. So if I understand this correctly, I said, still calm, still measured, any attempt to divide or move assets before I have fully reviewed and agreed to everything invalidates the entire process. Robert did not hesitate this time. Yes, he said. One word. Final. Daniel sat back slowly, the confidence completely gone now, replaced by something colder, something calculating, like he was trying to find a way around it. A loophole inside the loophole, but there was nothing immediate, nothing easy. For the first time since this started, no one was telling me what to do. No one was rushing me. No one was dismissing me. They were waiting on me. I set the pen down again, gently, deliberately, and looked at Daniel, holding his gaze long enough to make sure he understood the shift. Not loud, not dramatic, just undeniable. Then I think we need to be very careful, I said quietly, and this time no one argued. Daniel rubbed his face slowly, dragging his hand down like he was trying to reset the moment, but nothing about this was resetting. Not anymore. The room had shifted too far. Okay, he said finally, forcing a steadier tone, like he was stepping into a negotiation now instead of a certainty. Then we just fix it. He looked at me again, more carefully this time, measuring every word before it left his mouth. You review everything you sign and we move forward. No problem. No problem. I almost admired how quickly he adapted, how fast he tried to rebuild control out of something that was already breaking apart. I did not respond right away. I let the silence stretch, let him sit in it, let him wonder what I was thinking for once instead of assuming it. Big mistake, they always assumed. I picked up the document again, flipping back to the beginning, slower now, not rushed, not pressured, reading it like it actually mattered because now it did. I think I need more than a quick review, I said calmly, and I could feel the shift again, subtle but sharp. This is not a formality. Daniel's jaw tightened just a little. It does not have to be complicated, he replied, but there was a strain in his voice now, something underneath the control he was trying to hold on to. It already is, I said, without raising my voice, without adding anything dramatic, just stating it the way it was. Robert said nothing, but I could feel his attention on the document, on me, on everything that had just changed in the last few minutes. Daniel leaned forward again, slower this time, careful. What exactly are you asking for? He said. Not demanding anymore. Asking. That alone told me everything. I set the papers down neatly in front of me and folded my hands again, the same way I had at the beginning, but this time it meant something different. I want a full accounting of every action that has already been taken, I said. Every transfer, every conversation, every step you just called preliminary. Daniel did not answer right away, and that silence was louder than anything he had said all day. There is nothing significant, he said finally, but the words came out slower, less certain, like he knew they would not hold up if pushed. Then it should be easy to provide, I replied. Simple. Direct. No room to argue. He looked at Robert again, searching for support, for confirmation, for anything that would shift this back in his favor, but Robert remained neutral, which in this moment felt like agreement with me. We can put something together, Daniel said, but now it sounded like a concession, not a plan. I nodded once, like that was expected, like this was always how it was supposed to go. Good, I said quietly. Then I paused just long enough for the next part to land exactly where it needed to. Because until I see everything, I am not signing anything. The words did not need emphasis. They did not need volume. They just needed to exist. Daniel leaned back again, slower this time, his confidence gone, replaced with something more cautious, more aware. He was no longer in control of the room. Not even close. I could see it in the way he avoided looking at the document now, in the way his fingers stayed still on the table, in the way he stopped trying to rush me. For the first time since we sat down, he was waiting on me to decide what happened next. And I was not in any hurry. Daniel did not argue again, not immediately, and that told me more than anything he could have said, because he was the kind of man who filled silence when he thought he was right, and now he was choosing his words, weighing them, calculating outcomes instead of assuming them. Fine, he said finally, but it came out slower than before, controlled, deliberate. We will get you everything. He glanced at Robert, almost like he expected confirmation, but Robert simply nodded once, neutral, steady, letting the process shift exactly where it needed to go. I watched Daniel's shoulders settle, not relaxed, not comfortable, just adjusting like he was. Accepting a new position he did not like but could not avoid. It may take a day or two, he added, already trying to manage the timeline, trying to regain some sense of structure. I tilted my head slightly. Take the time you need, I said, and I meant it, not as permission but as control, because now the pace belonged to me. He nodded once, short, then gathered the papers in front of him, not as confidently as before, not as carelessly, more careful now, like every page mattered in a way it had not 10 minutes ago. Robert reached forward and stopped one of the documents from being stacked away. I will need copies of everything as well, he said, calm but firm, and Daniel hesitated just for a second before letting go of the page. Another small shift. Another thing he could not control. I leaned back in my chair again, watching the two of them without saying anything, letting them move, letting them organize, letting them feel that quiet pressure that comes when you realize the situation is no longer yours to manage. Big mistake rushing me like that. Daniel stood up halfway, then sat back down again like he remembered something, like there was still one more move he needed to make. Mom, he said, and the word sounded different now, less casual, more intentional, like he was trying to rebuild something that had already been broken. We are on the same side here. I did not answer right away. I let that sit in the air between us because we both knew it was not true, not anymore, not after the way this started. I folded my hands again, steady, composed. Then act like it, I said quietly, and I watched the way that landed, not loud, not emotional, just direct. He nodded again, slower this time, like he understood the message even if he did not like it. Robert closed his folder carefully, aligning the edges, methodical, precise, the way someone does when they know details are about to matter more than anything else. We should reconvene once the documentation is prepared, he said, already shifting into process, into procedure, into something structured that could contain what had just happened. Daniel agreed quickly, almost too quickly, like he wanted to end the meeting before anything else could surface. Chairs moved. Papers were gathered. The room started to reset itself, but it was not the same room anymore. Not for them. I stood last, not rushed, not pressured, taking my time as they moved around me, and for the first time since this began, no one tried to hurry me out, no one told me what to do next, no one assumed anything. At the door, Daniel paused, turning back toward me like he wanted to say something else, something to fix it, something to regain ground, but he did not find the words. He just nodded once and walked out. I stayed behind for a second, just me and Robert now, the silence quieter, more honest. He looked at me, not as someone to guide, not as someone to manage, but as someone who had just shifted the entire direction of the room without raising her voice once. "You knew something was off," he said. I met his eyes, calm, steady. "I knew they were moving too fast," I replied. He nodded slowly. "That clause," he said almost to himself. "They should have caught that." I allowed myself the smallest pause before answering. "They did not," I said. And that was all that mattered. The house felt different when I walked back in that afternoon, not quieter, not heavier, just clearer, like something had finally settled into place after being ignored for too long. And for the first time in days, I was not reacting to anything, I was thinking. I set my keys down on the kitchen counter, the same counter where I had spent years making meals, planning schedules, keeping everything running while Daniel built his version of responsibility somewhere else, and I stood there for a moment, just letting the silence exist without filling it. They thought this was about paperwork. That was their mistake. I moved into the living room slowly, my eyes drifting across everything that had once been shared, decisions made together, plans discussed late into the night, and I could feel it now, the difference between what my husband would have intended and what Daniel tried to push through in a single meeting. Too fast. Always too fast. I sat down and pulled the copy of the document from my bag, laying it flat on the table, smoothing it out carefully, not rushed, not pressured, reading it the way it should have been read from the beginning, line by line. No assumptions. No shortcuts. And there it was again, that clause buried deep enough to be missed by anyone who thought they already understood the outcome, but clear enough once you actually paid attention. Full spousal acknowledgement. Prior to execution. Any deviation. Invalid. I leaned back slightly, letting that settle, not with satisfaction, not yet, but with clarity, because this was not just a technicality, it was a safeguard, intentional, precise, something my husband would have insisted on, not out of distrust but out of principle. Nothing moved without both of us. That was always the rule. And Daniel either forgot that or chose to ignore it. Neither one worked in his favor now. My phone buzzed on the table, pulling me out of the thought just enough to notice it. Daniel. Of course. I let it ring once. Twice. Then I answered, not rushing, not eager. "We are putting everything together," he said immediately, skipping any pretense, his voice tighter than before, controlled but strained underneath. "You will have it by tomorrow." I did not respond right away. I let him hear the quiet on my end. Let him sit in it for just a second. "That is fine," I said calmly. "Take your time." There was a pause on the line, like he expected more, like he wanted something from me, reassurance, agreement, anything that would bring this back to where he was comfortable. "Mom," he added, softer now, almost careful. "There is no reason to make this harder than it needs to be." I almost smiled, not because it was funny, but because it was predictable. "Then it should be simple to do it correctly," I replied, just as calm, just as steady. He did not answer right away. That silence again. It was becoming familiar. "We will talk tomorrow," he said finally, and ended the call before I could respond. I set the phone back down and looked at the document again. Not rushing, not second-guessing, just seeing it for what it was. They thought they had already won. They thought all that was left was my signature. But now, everything depended on what I decided to do next, and for the first time since this started, that decision was entirely mine. The next morning I did not rush, not to get ready, not to leave, not even to check the time, because for once nothing depended on me being early or accommodating, and that alone changed everything. I arrived exactly when I intended to, not a minute before, and when I walked into Robert Hayes's office, Daniel was already there, sitting straighter than usual, a thick folder in front of him, organized, prepared, controlled, or at least trying to be. He looked up the second I stepped in, watching me carefully now, not dismissing, not assuming, just watching. That was new. "We have everything," he said, tapping the folder lightly, like he needed me to believe it before I even opened it. I took my seat without responding, placed my bag beside me, and pulled the folder closer, not opening it immediately, letting the moment stretch just long enough to remind him that this was not on his timeline anymore. Robert sat between us, composed as always, but there was a different kind of focus in him now, sharper, more attentive, like he knew this was the point where things either held together or completely fell apart. I opened the folder slowly and began to read, page by page, not skipping, not assuming, not letting anything slide past me the way it had the first time they tried to rush me through it. Bank transfers, property drafts, early allocation notes, emails printed out with timestamps. And there it was, clearer now, not hidden, not subtle anymore, just undeniable. Actions had already been taken. Not finalized, not completed, but started. Enough to matter. Enough to trigger exactly what that clause warned against. I did not react immediately. I kept reading, letting the silence build, letting Daniel sit across from me and wait, because now he understood what waiting felt like. Big mistake underestimating that. You began reallocating assets before I reviewed anything, I said finally, my voice calm, steady, not accusing, just stating what was already written in front of us. Daniel leaned forward slightly, hands clasped together now, no tapping, no casual confidence left. Preliminary, he said again, but softer this time, like he knew the word had already lost its strength. I looked up at him, held his gaze, then turned the page toward Robert, sliding it just enough for him to see the highlighted section. He did not need long. His eyes moved once, then stopped. That was enough. These actions fall within the scope of the clause, he said, and this time there was no hesitation, no uncertainty, just a clear line drawn exactly where it needed to be. Daniel exhaled slowly, leaning back, the weight of it settling in whether he wanted it to or not. So what happens now? He asked, and that question changed everything because it was not a challenge, not a demand, it was a request. I closed the folder gently and placed my hands on top of it, steady, grounded, in control in a way I had not been allowed to be before. Now, I said, calm, measured, we acknowledge that the process you started does not stand. Robert nodded once, confirming it without needing to add anything more. Daniel looked between us, calculating again, searching for something he could still hold on to. But there was nothing immediate, nothing simple left. Then we start over, he said, but even as he said it, it sounded smaller, like he knew it was not that easy anymore. I met his eyes, not angry, not emotional, just clear. No, I said quietly. Now we do it correctly. And for the first time since this began, there was no argument, no pushback, no attempt to rush past me, just silence, and the quiet realization that everything they thought was already decided had just been undone. I did not move right away after I said it because I did not need to, the room had already shifted as far as it was going to, and now it was just settling into place. Daniel sat there quiet, no arguments left, no quick answers, just thinking, really thinking this time, and I could see it in the way he avoided looking at the folder, like it had stopped being his plan and turned into something else entirely. Robert closed the document slowly, deliberate, like he understood that what just happened was not small, not technical, but final in a way that could not be undone by simply trying again. Correctly, Daniel repeated under his breath, almost like he was testing the word, trying to figure out what it meant now that it was not his definition anymore. I stood up first, not because I needed to leave, but because I wanted to, and that mattered more. This is not about slowing things down, I said calmly, looking at both of them, making sure it was clear. It is about doing it the way it was always meant to be done. Daniel nodded once, small, controlled, but there was no resistance in it anymore. He understood. Maybe not everything, but enough. So what happens now? He asked again, quieter this time, not pushing, just asking. I picked up the folder and held it for a second, feeling the weight of it, not as paper, but as everything it represented, years of decisions, trust, assumptions, and the moment those assumptions broke. Now nothing moves until I say it does, I replied, simple, direct, not emotional, just clear. Robert nodded in agreement without hesitation. That is consistent with the clause, he said, reinforcing it, not for me but for Daniel, so there would be no misunderstanding left. Daniel exhaled slowly, leaning back, accepting it in a way he had not accepted anything all morning. Okay, he said, and this time it was not forced, not calculated, just accepted. I placed the folder back on the table, but not toward him, not toward Robert, just centered, neutral, because for the first time it did not belong to either of them. It belonged to the process, and the process now included me fully, not as a formality, not as a signature, but as the deciding factor. I looked at Daniel one last time, steady, calm, not angry, not hurt, just clear. You tried to move forward without me, I said quietly. That was the mistake. He did not deny it. He did not argue. He just nodded again, slower this time, like he understood the weight of it now. I turned and walked toward the door, not rushed, not looking back immediately, because I did not need to check if they were watching. I already knew they were. My hand rested on the handle for just a second before I paused. Not for them but for myself, because this was the moment everything changed, not loudly, not dramatically, but completely. I glanced back once, meeting Daniel's eyes, holding it just long enough to make sure there was no confusion left, no assumptions, no shortcuts waiting to happen again. "Next time," I said, calm and even, "read everything." Then I opened the door and walked out, leaving the silence behind me. But this time it was not the kind of silence that erased me. It was the kind that stayed with them long after I was gone.